Have you ever felt like you're just drowning in information? Scrolling and scrolling, trying to really get a handle on something complex?
Yeah, absolutely.
And while you're doing that, don't you just wish sometimes there was a clearer path, a shortcut to those real aha moments of understanding?
Well, if that sounds familiar, you are definitely in the right place today. And it's all designed for you, our listener, to give you that edge without making you feel totally overwhelmed.
And today, wow, we are taking a plunge into a really profound and I think surprisingly diverse world, Indian philosophy.
It really is.
Now, I think for a lot of people, that phrase, Indian philosophy, it might bring up a very specific image, maybe just, Hindu philosophy or something quite narrow.
That's a common misconception, yeah.
But we've looked at, they reveal something so much richer, so much broader. We're talking about this incredibly vibrant, dynamic, intellectual landscape that's been tackling humanity's biggest questions for millennia.
It's genuinely remarkable. I mean, get ready to discover how these ancient thinkers, and it represents such a stunning spectrum of views, how they grappled with these huge questions, about knowledge, reality, ethics, liberation.
The big ones.
The really big ones. And you find ideas stretching from radical materialism, the sort of live for today view, all the way over to ultimate spiritual monism, the idea of absolute unity.
That's an incredible range.
And what's even more fascinating, maybe, is how they often anticipated debates we're still having today in science and philosophy. It feels surprisingly relevant,
So on this deep dive, we'll start by maybe laying out some foundational ideas, sort of a shared intellectual bedrock connecting many of these systems.
A good plan. Yeah, the common ground.
And then we're going to journey through some of the major schools, really uncover their unique takes on, the nature of reality itself, the different paths they saw to liberation, and even the existence or sometimes the non-existence of God.
Which can be quite surprising, that last point.
Definitely. It's going to be quite a workout for the mind, I think. So let's unpack this.
Okay, let's kick off part one then. Let's explore what we could maybe call the enduring spirit of Indian philosophy. Those common threads woven through this incredibly rich tapestry.
Sounds good.
And right off the bat, we really need to clear up that major misconception we touched on. When we say Indian philosophy, we are absolutely not just talking about Hindu philosophy in a purely religious sense.
No, that's such a critical distinction to make early on. Our sources really hammer this home. Indian philosophy is a much, much broader category.
Right.
It covers the philosophical thinking of all thinkers from the Indian subcontinent. Doesn't matter if they were ancient or modern, Hindu or non-Hindu, theist or atheist even. So limiting it just to Hindu philosophy would really miss the sheer scale of the intellectual activity going on.
Hugely. You'd miss the true breadth.
And that really highlights the striking diversity of outlook, doesn't it? We're talking about an intellectual world so big it includes radical materialists like the Cārvākas.
Who we'll definitely get to.
Oh, yeah. And really unorthodox thinkers like the Buddhas, the Buddhists, and the Jainas. And they stand right alongside the more, let's say, orthodox Vedic systems within this whole tradition.
And that inclusivity, that willingness to engage with such different views, points to something fundamental about the Indian philosophical approach.
Which is?
Its unwavering devotion to the search for truth. It genuinely valued diverse viewpoints, even those that might seem totally contradictory. It wasn't a tradition that shied away from disagreement.
Quite the opposite. It sounds like it almost thrived on it.
It really did. It embraced it as a way to get to deeper understanding.
Which I guess brings us neatly to how they actually did philosophy. It wasn't just, sitting alone under a tree contemplating. It was more active.
Oh, much more active. Less solitary contemplation, more like a bustling intellectual arena. This Catholic spirit, as the sources call it, meaning universal or broad-minded, fostered this incredibly rigorous debate culture.
A debate culture. Interesting.
Yeah. Each school made a real effort to learn the views of all the others. They wouldn't even start presenting their own conclusions until they had thoroughly considered their opponent's arguments. They needed to know how to meet those points, challenge them, or maybe even absorb them.
Wow. So it was a very structured way of engaging intellectually, almost like a formal process you had to follow.
Exactly. You couldn't just throw out an opinion and expect it to stick. There was a protocol, a method that ensured a certain level of intellectual honesty.
Okay, what did that involve?
Typically, it involved 3 key steps. Standard practice, really. First, you had the prior view, or purvapaka. This is where a philosopher would carefully, meticulously state the opponent's case.
Fairly, though, not like a straw man argument.
Oh, absolutely fairly. The expectation was an accurate representation. You had to show you truly understood the other side before you could critique it.
Okay, makes sense. And after laying out the opponent's view so precisely,
Then came the refutation, or hantana. This was the part where you'd logically dismantle that view, pointing out inconsistencies, weaknesses, flawed assumptions, you name it.
all right, clear the ground first.
Exactly. And then, only then, would you present your own position. That's the subsequent view, or siddhanta. You'd state it clearly, and then prove it with your own arguments and evidence.
That's an extraordinary level of intellectual discipline. It almost guarantees that these schools would be incredibly thorough.
It does. And it's why, if you pick up a major work on, say, the Vedānta system, you'll find it carefully discussing and weighing the views of practically all the other major schools: Cārvāka, Buddha, Jaina, Sāṅkhya, Yoga, Mīmāṁsā, Vaiśeṣika. It's a real intellectual cross-pollination.
And presumably the same is true if you look at a major Buddhist or Jaina text. They'd engage with the others too.
Absolutely. This encyclopedic grasp of different ideas is quite remarkable. And it means that many problems that contemporary Western philosophy is still wrestling with actually find parallels and often deeply explored solutions right there in ancient Indian thought.
It's like they got there first on some of these debates.
In many cases, yes.
Yeah.
It's uncanny sometimes.
So with all this debate, all these diverse views, what was the ultimate goal? What was driving it all? Was there a shared objective uniting these, seemingly very different traditions?
Well, at its deepest level, Indian philosophy, in its broadest sense, is really about the love of knowledge. It's this profound search for knowledge of oneself, of the world, and, for many schools, knowledge of God, or the ultimate reality.
Okay.
And across almost every single Indian school, the ultimate aim, the final goal, is liberation, moksha, and that's achieved through the direct realization of truth, or tattva-darshan.
Direct realization. So it's not just about knowing something intellectually like in a book. It's about actually experiencing it.
Precisely. It's a fundamental shift in being, not just thinking. And the consequence, as our sources describe it, is profound. The person who achieves this direct realization becomes truly free.
And the person who doesn't?
Well, they remain entangled in the world, caught in the cycle of suffering. So the core purpose of all this philosophy, every argument, every insight, is ultimately about removing suffering and attaining this state of lasting freedom.
And underpinning this whole quest for liberation, there's a really significant concept that seems common across almost all these systems, right? The idea of an eternal moral order, maybe best known through the law of karma.
Indeed. William James, the American philosopher, he describes spiritualism as involving the affirmation of an eternal moral order and letting loose of hope. And that deep-seated faith in such an order, it really permeates almost the entire history of Indian thought.
With maybe one exception.
Yeah, the notable exception being the Cārvāka materialists we mentioned. But otherwise, this belief in a universal law, ensuring regularity, ensuring righteousness, operating across everything, gods, humans, nature, it goes way back to the Ayurveda, where it was called Dutta.
So this isn't just about the universe running smoothly like cosmic clockwork. It's inherently moral clockwork.
That's a great way to put it. It's about a deeply ingrained moral fabric to the universe itself. And this core idea, it evolved and showed up in different ways in different schools.
How so?
Well, in the Mīmāṁsā system, for example, it appears as the concept of apurva. That's like a subtle, unseen potential generated by performing rituals correctly, which guarantees you'll enjoy the fruits of that ritual later on.
Ah, okay. Like a cosmic IOU generated by the ritual.
Kind of, yeah. And then in the Nyāya Vaiśeṣika school, you have the theory of adutta. That's an unseen principle that guides even material atoms according to moral laws, subtly influencing events based on past actions.
And then the big one, the law of karma, which you said is accepted almost universally. Orthodox, Jaina, Buddhist.
Yes, the law of karma is perhaps the most pervasive expression of this moral order. You could think of it as the law of conservation of moral values, covering both good deeds merit and bad deeds demerit.
Conservation of moral values. I like that. What does it imply practically?
It implies two crucial things. First, no loss of work done kata prasya. Every action, good or bad, inevitably has its consequence down the line. Nothing just disappears.
Okay, cause and effect, morally speaking.
Right. And second, nothing happens to a person that isn't a result of their own past actions, akritopagama. You basically reap what you yourself have sown. No undeserved suffering, no unearned reward, ultimately.
But there's a really important nuance here, isn't there? It's not like every single action binds you tighter to this cycle. There's an escape clause.
Absolutely crucial point. The sources are very clear. Actions performed disinterestedly, without passion or attachment to the results, do not produce binding effects.
Yeah.
They're like a fried seed. They can't germinate.
Ah, okay. So it's the attachment to the outcome, the self-interest, that creates the karmic knots.
Exactly. Actions driven by ego, desire, and aversion are the ones that bind you. Actions performed selflessly, without craving a specific result, can actually lead towards freedom. This is the practical pathway to liberation from that otherwise relentless cycle.
It's fascinating how this belief in conserved moral value is so fundamental that it essentially elevates systems like Jainism and Buddhism to the status of religions, even without a traditional creator god. The moral law itself is the foundation.
Precisely. The inherent moral structure of reality takes on that central spiritual role.
Now, earlier, you mentioned that just knowing these truths intellectually isn't enough for liberation. This brings us to another common thread, the vital role of practical discipline. Things like yoga and self-control.
That's right. While ignorance of Vidya was seen as the root cause of suffering, the Indian thinkers were quite pragmatic. They knew that simply understanding a philosophical truth wouldn't instantly erase years, lifetimes maybe, of ingrained habits and wrong beliefs.
Right. You might get the concept, but it doesn't automatically change how you react or feel based on old conditioning.
Exactly. These deeply ingrained patterns, shaped by countless daily experiences, they needed to be actively worked on, actively dispelled. You couldn't just think your way out of them entirely.
So this need to really embed the right understanding, to make it stick, led to?
It led to the development of really elaborate techniques for concentration and meditation. The yoga system, of course, provides the most famous and detailed explanation. But it's really important to grasp that yoga, in this broader sense of disciplined concentration through self-control, isn't exclusive to the yoga school.
Oh, really? So other schools use similar ideas?
Definitely. You find the principles in various forms woven into Buddhism, Jainism, Sāṅkhya, Vedānta, even the logical Nyāya Vaiśeṣika system recognized the need for mental discipline. It was a widely accepted tool.
So what's the fundamental purpose of this kind of practice across these schools?
The purpose is to make right beliefs permanent, to really root them deeply in the psyche. Philosophical truths, even if you grasp them intellectually, they need what the sources call long intellectual concentration, to truly overcome the opposing beliefs and habits that are so deeply embedded. Without that sustained meditation and practical effort, those old patterns just won't release their grip.
Which implies that self-control, sayama, is absolutely essential, not just for focusing the mind, but for making these truths actually effective in how you live. It connects thinking to acting.
And this is where Indian thought offers a really interesting contrast to, say, Socrates' idea that virtue is knowledge.
How so?
Well, Indian thinkers recognize that we aren't just guided by pure reason. We're also driven by what they sometimes call blind animal impulses. There's a saying that captures this perfectly. I know what is right, but feel no inclination to follow it. I know it is wrong, but cannot desist from it.
Oh, wow. That resonates. That feels very human.
Doesn't it? It acknowledges that gap between knowing and doing. These impulses are often described as likes, raga, and dislikes. They're the automatic springs of action when we're just running on habit. Our senses, our mind, our motor organs, the indriyas, they've historically served these blind impulses.
So even if philosophy helps us ditch wrong beliefs, we still have to deal with the emotional habits tied to them.
Exactly. We have to actively let go of the corresponding likes and dislikes that compel us to act in certain ways based on those old beliefs.
But is this about, like, crushing those impulses, becoming emotionless?
No, and that's a crucial point the sources stress. Self-control isn't meant to be a negative, ascetic killing of impulses. It's more about checking their bad tendencies and habits in order to employ them for a better purpose and make them obey the dictates of reason.
So redirecting them, refining them.
Precisely. It's reformation and subjugation to the higher self, not just destruction. For instance, in the yoga system, you have the yamas. These are 5 moral restraints. Don't injure, don't lie, don't steal, control sensuality, don't be greedy.
The don'ts.
Right. But then you also have the niyamas, which are 5 positive observances. Cultivate purity, contentment, fortitude, study, and resignation to God. It's about actively building good habits alongside restraining bad ones.
So it's a balance. Active cultivation, not just suppression, consciously shaping your inner world.
Exactly. And you see this reflected in texts like the Bhagavad Gita, too. It teaches that the person who has mastered themselves finds contentment even while experiencing the world through their senses, because those senses are freed from the influence of love and hate. It's a really sophisticated approach to managing our human nature, not denying it, but transforming it.
And thinking about the scope of Indian philosophy, we really can't ignore its profound sense of the infinite, especially when it comes to cosmic scale and time. I mean, you look at the ancient Buddhists, and the universe they describe is just staggering.
It really is. The Buddhists talk about Brahma as these immense cosmic eggs, entire universes, each one containing 14 distinct regions, separated by distances measured in tens of millions of yojanas.
And a yojana is what, roughly 8 to 15 kilometers?
Something like that, yeah. And they conceived of the infinite cosmos containing thousands of millions of these individual world systems. It's a scale that, frankly, until modern astronomy revealed the true vastness of space, probably seemed like pure fantasy to many.
It almost mirrors the kind of mind-boggling scale we're discovering now with telescopes like Hubble or Webb. And it wasn't just space, was it? Their concept of time was equally immense.
Oh, absolutely. The basic unit for cosmic time is often described as a single day of the creator god, Brahma. And one of Brahma's days is said to equal 1,000 yugas,
which translates to
a staggering 432 million human years. And that's the duration of one period of creation.
Yeah.
It's followed by an equally long night of dissolution or chaos. And these cosmic days and nights, creation and destruction, they just alternate in a seemingly endless cycle.
So unlike, say, the Big Bang Theory, there isn't a single absolute beginning point for the universe in most of these Indian systems.
And that's a massive aha moment right there.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. The universe, for most Indian philosophical schools, is generally considered beginningless, Anadi.
Beginningless.
Yeah. Indian thinkers actually thought it was kind of pointless, even meaningless, to ask about a first creation. How can you have a first in a series that has no beginning?
Right. Any point is just earlier or later relative to other points.
Exactly. There's no absolute starting line. And that perspective, it fundamentally shifts the whole question of origins. It suggests maybe some questions about ultimate beginnings are just unanswerable by their very nature, which kind of frees you up to focus on the here and now, the current cycle, rather than getting lost in unprovable speculation about an absolute start. It's a very different way of framing reality.
Okay, that gives us a great foundation on the common spirit. Let's dive into part 2 now, exploring the diverse paths to truth. We should probably start with the unorthodox systems, the heterodox schools, and where else to begin but with the most radical, the Cārvāka philosophy.
Yes, the Cārvākas. They stand in such stark contrast to pretty much every other Indian system. The name Cārvāka itself has almost become shorthand for materialist. Their view is often called Lokyāta, literally, the view of the common people.
And they really challenge the dominant spiritual and metaphysical ideas of their time, don't they?
Oh, fundamentally. They do it by starting with a very simple but incredibly powerful claim about knowledge, their epistemology.
Which is?
That perception is the only valid guide to knowledge, period. If you can't see it, hear it, touch it, taste it, or smell it, directly perceive it, then it's either not real, or at the very least, you can't know it's real.
That's the absolute core then, just perception.
That's their bedrock. And because of that, they critically reject other sources of knowledge that most other traditions rely on, like inference and testimony.
Okay, why reject inference? That seems pretty basic to how we reason.
Their argument is quite sharp. They basically say inference is always a leap in the dark.
A leap in the dark? How so?
Well, take the classic example. You see smoke on a hill, you infer fire. The Cārvāka says, hold on, you're jumping from the perceived smoke to the unperceived fire. Now, other schools like Nyāya would talk about the vyapti, the invariable connection wherever there's smoke, there's fire.
Right.
But the Cārvāka fires back, how can you know it's invariable? You can't possibly perceive every single instance of smoke and fire that has ever existed or will ever exist to be absolutely certain. It's always based on limited experience, so it's never truly certain knowledge, just probability at best.
Okay, that's a tough critique. So if perception is the only game in town, what does that do to their metaphysics, especially ideas like the soul or God?
It demolishes them, basically. For the Cārvākas, consciousness isn't some attribute of an unseen, non-material soul. No, it's simply a product, an emergent quality of the perceptible living body itself.
Emergent? Like how?
They used analogies. like the intoxicating quality of wine emerging from the fermentation of non-intoxicating ingredients.
Yeah.
Consciousness arises from the combination of material elements in the body. They'd even point to everyday expressions like "I am fat" or "I am lame" as direct evidence you're identifying the I with the perceptible body.
So if the self is the body, then death
Is the absolute end. Game over. No possibility of immortality, no past lives, no afterlife, no heaven, no hell. All those concepts become meaningless chatter. Wishful thinking may be promoted by priests.
and God.
Same fate. You can't perceive God, so his existence can't be proven. The Cārvākas argued that the material elements themselves, with their inherent natures as svabhava, just spontaneously combine to produce the world. No need for a divine creator or designer.
So the world is just random chance, fortuitous products.
Pretty much. They preferred atheism because there was no perceptual evidence for God, and they felt the world could be explained without one.
Wow. Okay, so would such a radical view of reality just matter? Just this life, their ethics must be equally direct, maybe even shocking to some.
They certainly are direct. They rejected the traditional goals. Heaven, a priestly invention for control. Liberation, okay, impossible if there's no soul, or if it just means absence of pain. Well, that's just death anyway, so what's left? Exactly. Their ethical stance boils down to pursue the maximum pleasure you can and minimize the pain you experience right here, right now, in this life.
So a very practical, almost hedonistic approach. I think one of the sources summed it up as rather a pigeon today than a peacock tomorrow.
That captures it perfectly. Immediate gratification, tangible pleasure, is valued over uncertain future promises. Why suffer now for some imaginary heaven later? Enjoy the pleasures that are available.
Okay, but here's where it gets maybe more nuanced, right? Because when we hear materialism or hedonism, we might think of something crude or unrestrained. But you mentioned there's a distinction.
Yes, and this is a really interesting point our sources bring up. They talk about a difference between maybe the more basic Cārvākas and the cultured Cārvākas, the Sushikaita Cārvāka.
Cultured materialists. That sounds almost like an oxymoron to some.
It might seem that way. But thinkers like Vaiśeṣika, who wrote the famous Kama Sutra, could arguably fit into this category. They weren't just advocating for, brute, beastly pleasure.
What then?
They actually emphasized things like self-control, even a kind of discipline, and urbanity, cultivating fine arts, refined manners, social grace as ways to elevate enjoyment, to make it more sophisticated and lasting. For them, it was about harmoniously cultivating dharma, which they might see as social order contributing to pleasure, artha, wealth needed for enjoyment, and kama, pleasure itself, with enjoyment being the ultimate goal, but pursued intelligently, artfully.
So they actually build elements of discipline and social responsibility into their pursuit of pleasure. That's quite sophisticated for a materialist school.
It really is. Some apparently even regarded the king as divine, which shows a certain faith in the necessity of social order and leadership for everyone to pursue their enjoyment smoothly. They incorporated political thought, economics. They're comparable perhaps to modern European positivists, or maybe the ancient Greek followers of Democritus. It wasn't just reckless abandon. It was about living wisely and well in the only life they believed they had.
Okay, so from that radical empiricism and focus on this life, let's pivot completely. Let's move to Jainism. Another heterodox system, but one that embraces a totally different kind of pluralism and, maybe most famously, a profound respect for life.
Yes, Jainism offers a stark contrast. It's grounded in what you might call common sense realism and pluralism. It sees the world as made up of two fundamental kinds of things: living entities, jiva, and non-living entities, ajiva.
And the key belief about the jiva, the living entities,
is that every single living being, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, possesses a spirit or soul. Even beings with very imperfect bodies, like single-sense organisms. Every life has an inherent consciousness.
And that belief, I imagine, is absolutely foundational to their ethics, especially the principle of ahimsa.
Absolutely central. Ahimsa, non-injury or non-violence, is the cornerstone of Jaina ethics, and it flows directly from that belief in the soul residing in all living beings. It applies not just to actions, but also to speech and even thought. You strive to avoid harming any life form.
And alongside this deep respect for life, there's another really distinctive Jaina principle, anekantavada, the idea of a many-sided reality.
Yes, and this leads directly to their unique theory of judgment, Sattvada. These two are deeply intertwined.
Okay, many-sided reality. That sounds like it could get confusing, or maybe lead to total relativism where anything goes. What does it actually mean, and why is it so important for them?
This is where we hit another really insightful aha moment in Indian thought. Anekantavada basically says that reality, any object or concept, is incredibly complex. It has infinite aspects, infinite facets or properties.
Infinite, wow.
And Sivada, the theory of judgment, follows from this. It asserts that any judgment we make about reality is necessarily partial. It's true only from a particular standpoint, considering a specific aspect. It's a profound statement about the limits of human knowledge.
So it's like that famous story of the blind men and the elephant.
Exactly like that. It's the perfect illustration. Each man touches a different part of it, the leg, the ear, the trunk, the tail, and concludes the elephant is like a pillar or a fan or a snake or a rope.
And they argue because they think their partial view is the whole truth.
Precisely. Their quarrel only ends when they realize that each of their perspectives, while true from their limited viewpoint, is only a fraction of the whole picture. To be truly accurate, each needs to qualify their statement with somehow or side.
Somehow the elephant is like a pillar, somehow it's like a fan.
Right. That humble qualifier, side, acknowledges the relativity of their judgment to their specific standpoint. It signifies from a certain perspective.
So it's somehow S is P, somehow S is not P. Our sources mention they even recognize 7 different forms of these qualified judgments.
We do, including more complex ones like somehow S is both P and not P, sequentially or from different aspects, and even somehow S is indescribable.
Yeah.
This last one applies when trying to simultaneously predicate seemingly incompatible qualities in the same aspect of esse. The complexity defies a simple label.
But they're careful to say this doesn't violate the law of contradiction, right?
Yes.
You can't say it's simultaneously a pillar and not a pillar in the exact same way.
Correct. It's about acknowledging that incompatible characteristics might belong to the same thing, just not in the same respect or at the same time. It highlights the complexity and multifaceted nature of reality.
This philosophy must cultivate an incredibly open-minded approach. It seems like a direct challenge to dogmatism.
Absolutely. It fosters what they call the Catholic spirit, that universal, all-embracing attitude. It encourages accepting that others' views might be valid from their own perspectives, and it actively protests against the fallacy of exclusive predication, ekantavada, which is basically saying, my view is the only truth and everyone else is wrong. It's a powerful, ancient call for intellectual humility.
So given this worldview emphasizing nonviolence and nuanced understanding, how does liberation work in Jainism? What's the goal?
For Jainas, the soul, jiva, is inherently perfect. It has infinite knowledge, faith, power, and bliss potential. But due to karma, generated by actions driven by passions like anger, pride, deceit, and greed, the soul becomes obscured, bound to matter. Bondage starts in thought bhavabandha, which then attracts actual karmic matter, dravyabandha.
So liberation is about removing that karmic matter and letting the soul's inherent perfection shine through.
Exactly. Liberation is the complete removal of that bondage, allowing the soul to attain its natural, perfect state.
And how is this achieved? I remember reading about the 3 gems or 3 jewels.
Yes, the path to liberation is summarized as the 3 gems, or triratna. These are right faith, samyagdarshana, right knowledge, samyajnana, and right conduct, samyakaritra.
And they all have to work together.
Yes, they're considered the joint, inseparable path. Right faith means having a firm conviction in the Jaina teachings. Right knowledge is having a correct and detailed understanding of the Jaina analysis of reality, free from doubt. And right conduct is putting it all into practice.
Which involves?
It involves rigorous ethical discipline, most famously the 5 great vows, the Panyaka Mahavrata, absolute nonviolence, ahimsa, truthfulness, satya, non-stealing, asteya, control of sensuality, celibacy, brahmacharya, and non-attachment, non-possession, aparigraha, plus other practices like carefulness in movement and speech, samiti, restraint of mind, speech, and body, gupti, cultivating virtues, meditation, and enduring hardships with equanimity.
It sounds like a very demanding but comprehensive path. And one thing that's notable about Jainism, they don't really have a concept of a creator god, do they?
No, they don't. There's no belief in a supreme being who created the universe or intervenes in worldly affairs. Instead, the role models, the objects of reverence, are the Tirthankāras.
The liberated saints, like Mahavira.
Exactly. They are perfected souls who have already achieved liberation and taught the path. They are adored as ideals, demonstrating that liberation is achievable through human effort, following the path they laid out. The focus is very much on self-reliance and individual effort on the spiritual path.
Okay, from the Jaina focus on non-injury and the relativity of viewpoints, let's shift again to another incredibly influential heterodox system, Buddhism. Like Jainism, it's centered on overcoming suffering, but it takes a very different philosophical path.
Indeed. The stories of Gautama Buddha himself sets the stage. Born a prince, shielded from suffering, but then confronted with the realities of old age, sickness, and death. This prompted his great renunciation, his search for an end to this universal misery.
And after his enlightenment, his core teaching became the Four Noble Truths. Can you maybe unpack this for us in a way that feels immediate?
Certainly. The first is the truth of suffering, or dukkha. Buddha's insight here was that suffering, dissatisfaction, stress, it's pervasive in life. It's not just the obvious physical pain or loss. Even pleasant experiences are ultimately unsatisfactory because they're impermanent, they don't last.
Okay, life involves suffering. What's the second truth?
The truth of the origin of suffering, samudaya. Suffering doesn't just happen randomly, it has identifiable causes. Buddha explained this through the concept of dependent origination, or pratityasamutpada. It's often depicted as a chain of 12 links.
That sounds quite complex. What's the core idea of that chain?
The core idea is that everything arises in dependence on conditions. Nothing exists in isolation. Suffering arises from a chain that includes things like birth, becoming, clinging, craving, or thirst, feeling, contact, the sense bases. But ultimately, the entire chain is rooted in fundamental ignorance, avidya. Ignorance of the true nature of reality, particularly its impermanence, anicca, its inherent unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and the absence of a permanent independent self, anatta. This ignorance fuels craving, which leads to clinging, which leads to suffering.
So suffering exists, and it has a cause rooted in ignorance and craving. What are the next two truths?
They offer the way out. The truth of the cessation of suffering, nirodha. This states that it is possible to end suffering by completely eradicating its root, causes ignorance and craving. When these cease, suffering ceases. This state of cessation is nirvana.
The ultimate goal. And the fourth truth tells you how to get there.
Exactly. The truth of the path to cessation, Magga. This is the practical roadmap, the famous Noble Eightfold Path.
The Eightfold Path. It seems like a very holistic system covering different aspects of life.
It really is. It encompasses, right? Understanding, seeing things as they are, right resolve, determination towards liberation, right speech, avoiding lies, slander, harsh words, idle chatter, right conduct, acting ethically, often summarized by the 5 precepts, not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, not taking intoxicants, right livelihood, earning a living ethically, right effort, striving to prevent evil and cultivate good, right mindfulness, developing constant awareness of body, feelings, mind, and mental objects, and right concentration, developing deep states of meditation samadhi.
It's a complete blueprint for transforming your mind and actions.
It is. It's a practical, ethical, and mental discipline designed to bring about that fundamental shift from ignorance to wisdom, from craving to letting go, from suffering to liberation.
Now, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Buddha himself was apparently quite wary of getting bogged down in purely theoretical or metaphysical debates. His focus was intensely practical, ending suffering.
That's true. He famously remained silent on certain speculative questions, like whether the universe is eternal or not, or whether a liberated person exists after death. He felt such questions didn't lead to liberation.
Yet, paradoxically, his teachings became the foundation for an incredibly rich and complex philosophical tradition. How did that happen?
Well, as one of our sources puts it, quite aptly, every reasoned attempt to avoid philosophy lands a thinker into a new kind of philosophy. Even in his practical teachings, there were underlying philosophical assumptions about causation, about the nature of the self, about experience. His philosophy could be described as a kind of positivism or empiricism, focusing on what can be experienced and verified.
But his silence on those bigger metaphysical questions left a vacuum.
Precisely. And his followers, trying to understand and elaborate on his teachings, inevitably started interpreting that silence and filling in the gaps. This led to what the sources call the nemesis of neglected metaphysics. Meaning that because he didn't definitively settle certain metaphysical issues, it opened the door for intense debate and speculation among his followers, eventually leading to the birth of something like 30 different schools of Buddhist thought, many of which dived headfirst into the very metaphysical questions Buddha tried to sidestep.
30 schools? Wow. Can we maybe touch on the 4 major philosophical schools that emerged representing the main lines of thought?
We can. They broadly fall under the two main branches of Buddhism, Hinayana and Mahayana. Let's start with perhaps the most radical philosophically. This Shunyavada, or Madhyamika school, associated with the philosopher Nagarjuna. They're sometimes labeled nihilists, but that's a bit misleading.
Okay, so what's their core idea? What do they mean by shunya, or void emptiness?
Their radical claim is that everything, all phenomena, mental and physical, is ultimately devoid of inherent, independent existence or self-nature, svabhava. Everything is shunya, empty.
Empty of independent existence, so things don't exist on their own.
Exactly. They argue that everything arises dependently. The self, the object of perception, the act of knowing, they're all interdependent. If you analyze any one of them deeply, you find it has no standalone reality. Think of an illusion, like seeing a snake in a rope. When you realize it's a rope, the snake vanishes. They argue that all phenomena are like this dependently risen, empty of inherent being, like dream objects. It's a profound deconstruction of our usual assumptions about reality.
That's a mind-bending concept. What about the next school, the Vijnanavada or Yogacara school? They're known as subjective idealists, right?
Correct. Their central thesis is that only consciousness, vijnana, is ultimately real. What we perceive as external objects are, in reality, just manifestations or projections of mind, like images in a dream. There's no external world independent of consciousness.
But wait, if objects are just mental projections, why can't I just conjure up anything I want? Why does the world seem so solid and consistent?
That's the key objection they address. Their explanation involves the concept of the alaya vijnana, or storehouse consciousness. This is a deep level of mind containing karmic seeds or impressions, saskara, from all past experiences. These seeds ripen over time and project our experience of a seemingly external world. What appears depends on the ripening seeds, not just our immediate will. And as their name Yogacara, practitioners of yoga, suggests, they emphasize meditation practices the way to directly realize this mind-only reality. Okay, so two schools that in different ways question the reality of the external world. What about the schools that lean more towards realism? The Sautrantika. The Sautrantikas represent a move back towards realism. They're often called representationists or critical realists. They argue for the reality of both mental states and external objects.
How do they argue against the mind-only view?
They point out that our very language implies externality. When we say something appears like an external object, that comparison only makes sense if external objects actually exist. They also argue that perception itself distinguishes between internal mental states and external objects.
So, external objects exist. But how do we know them? Do we perceive them directly?
This is where the representationist part comes in. The Sautrantikas say we don't perceive external objects directly. Instead, the object imparts a form or representation onto our consciousness, like a seal making an impression in wax. We are directly aware of this mental representation, and from that, we infer the existence of the external object that caused it.
Ah, okay. So knowledge is indirect, mediated by a mental copy. What about the last major school, the Vaiśeṣika?
The Vaiśeṣikas are the direct realists of the bunch. They agree with the Sautrantikas that both mental and external realities exist, but their key difference lies in how we know external objects.
They say we perceive them directly.
Yes. They argue forcefully against the Sautrantika view of inference. Their point is simple. How can you infer something you've never directly perceived? You can infer fire from smoke only because you've previously perceived fire and smoke together. If external objects were never directly perceived, inference of them would be impossible. Therefore, they conclude we must perceive external objects directly.
So you have this incredible philosophical spectrum within Buddhism itself, from emptiness to mind-only to indirect realism to direct realism. How do these philosophical differences relate to the broader religious divisions, Hinayana and Mahayana?
Generally speaking, the Hinayana, meaning smaller vehicle, a term coined by Mahayanists, represents the earlier schools of Buddhism. Philosophically, it encompasses schools like Vaiśeṣika and Sautrantika. Religiously, it's often characterized as a religion without God, where the universal moral law of karma holds sway. Buddha is revered as the supreme teacher who showed the path, and the ideal is the arhat, who achieves individual liberation. Adherents take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dhamma teachings, and the Sangha monastic community.
And Mahayana, greater vehicle.
Mahayana represents later developments and includes philosophical schools like Madhyamika and Yogacara. It offers a more expansive vision. A key idea is that the ultimate reality or emptiness isn't separate from the world of phenomena, it's found within it. This leads to the insight that nirvana isn't some distant goal to escape to, but can be realized right here, within the midst of worldly life.
So a more world-affirming stance, perhaps.
In many ways, yes. Ascetic withdrawal is often de-emphasized in favor of what the sources call a loving, enlightened interest in the world's affairs. The philosophical basis for this is often the idea of the interconnectedness and emptiness of all beings. If there's no ultimate separation, then striving only for one's own liberation seems limited.
Leading to the ideal of the bodhisattva.
Exactly. The bodhisattva is the Mahayana ideal, an enlightened being who compassionately postpones their own final nirvana in order to help all other sentient beings achieve liberation first. It embodies a universal compassion and a commitment to the welfare of all.
Wow, that's an incredible sweep through the heterodox schools. Okay, let's pivot now to section B, the orthodox systems. These are the schools that, broadly speaking, accept the authority of the Vedas, and we should probably start with that powerful alliance, the Nyāya Vaiśeṣika schools.
Yes, these two are often studied together as allied systems, Samana Tantra. They share the same fundamental goal: liberating the individual self from suffering, which they believe arises from ignorance. Liberation, for them, means the absolute cessation of pain achieved through right knowledge of reality.
And they each have their specialties, right? Nyāya is known for logic.
Precisely. The Nyāya system, founded by the sage Gautama, is primarily focused on logic and epistemology, the conditions for correct thinking and acquiring true knowledge. It's even nicknamed Tarkashastra, the science of reasoning. Its whole philosophy is structured around 16 topics, or padartha, but the most crucial are prama, valid sources of knowledge, and prameya, objects of knowledge.
So what are the valid sources of knowledge, the pramas, according to Nyāya?
Nyāya accepts 4 independent sources: perception pratyeka, inference anumana, comparison upamana, and testimony shabda.
Okay, let's break those down. Perception.
Pratyeko is direct knowledge, coming through the senses, external perception, or the mind, internal perception like feeling pain or joy. They make an interesting distinction between 2 stages. First, nirvikalpaka, which is indeterminate perception, just a raw sensing of something without applying concepts or names, like seeing a shape without yet recognizing that's a cow.
And the second stage?
Is savikalpaka, determinate perception. This is where the mind interprets the raw data, applies concepts, and makes a judgment like, this is a cow.
And didn't you mention earlier they have a concept of extraordinary perception that helps explain how we know universal truths?
Yes, that's samayalakana. It's their way of explaining how we can know things like all humans are mortal. We obviously can't perceive every single human. But Nyāya says when you perceive an individual as a human, you're simultaneously perceiving the universal property of humanness, manuyatva, present in that individual. And it's through this perception of the universal class essence that you grasp the entire class. It's a fascinating way to ground inductive reasoning, going from particulars to universals in a form of perception.
Okay, that's perception. What about inference anumana, which is so central to their logical system?
Inference, for Nyāya, is knowledge that follows other knowledge. It's the process of moving from a perceived sign or mark, liya, to knowledge of something else that it's connected to, based on a known invariable concomitance, or vyapti, between them.
The smoke and fire example again?
Exactly. You perceive the smoke.
Yeah.
You know from past experience that smoke is invariably accompanied by fire, the vyapti, so you infer the presence of fire, even though you might not directly see the fire itself.
And they have that very specific 5-step argument structure, their syllogism, much more detailed than the typical Western 3-part version.
They do. It's designed to be absolutely conclusive, leaving no room for doubt. It goes: 1, pratijaya, the assertion or thesis, the hill has fire. 2, hetu, the reason or evidence, because it has smoke. 3, udahanan, the universal principle with an example, whatever has smoke has fire, like a kitchen. 4, upanaya, the application to the current case, this hill has smoke, which is invariably accompanied by fire. 5, nigamana, the conclusion, therefore the hill has fire. 5, nigamana, it really walks you through the entire reasoning process.
And the absolute foundation for that inference is the vyapti, that invariable concomitance. How do they establish that with certainty, especially given the Cārvāka critique that you can't observe all instances?
They have a rigorous method. It involves repeated observation of agreement in presence, where smoke is, fire is, and agreement in absence, where fire isn't, smoke isn't, under varying conditions. Crucially, they focus on eliminating any potential apadis, hidden, underlying conditions that might be responsible for the connection, rather than the smoke itself.
Like the wet fuel example you mentioned. Smoke only accompanies fire if the fuel isn't wet.
Exactly. Yeah, to systematically rule out such conditions. And here's another aha moment. While they stress empirical observation, Nyāya argues that truly establishing Vyapti ultimately relies on intuitively grasping the class essence, or universal. It's not just counting instances, it's understanding the essential nature that links, say, smokeness to fireness. It involves a kind of conceptual insight beyond mere observation.
Fascinating. Okay, what about the other two pramadas? Comparison and testimony.
Comparison, or upamana, gives knowledge based on similarity. The classic example. Someone tells you a gavaya, a wild ox, is like a cow. Later you're in the forest, see an animal that resembles a cow, and you realize, this must be a gavaya. It's knowledge gained through analogy.
And testimony, Shabda.
This is knowledge gained from the words of reliable and authoritative sources, whether human experts or sacred texts like the Vedas, which they accept. For testimony to be valid, though, the sentence conveying it must meet 4 conditions.
4 conditions for a sentence to make sense.
Yes. Et kokad, expectancy. The words need to imply each other grammatically. Etji, the verb bring, creates an expectation for an object. Bring what? Yogyata, fitness. The words must be semantically compatible, not contradictory. You can't say moisten with fire. Sanidhi, proximity. The words need to be close together in time or space to be understood as a single statement. And tatparya, intended meaning. You need to grasp the speaker's or writer's actual intention, especially with ambiguous words like bank, riverbank, or financial bank. They believe the ultimate meaning or potency of words derives from God's will.
So a very detailed logical and epistemological framework. What about their metaphysics? How do they view the self and God?
Okay, the self, or Atman, in Nyāya, is considered a unique substance, distinct from the body, senses, and mind. It's eternal, indestructible, and all-pervading. But this is a really key point for Nyāya, consciousness is not its essential nature.
Oh, consciousness is not essential to the soul.
No, they see it as an accidental attribute. The soul acquires consciousness only when it's connected with the mind, senses, and objects. In the state of liberation, when those connections are severed, consciousness actually ceases. The self is the substrate, the knower, the experiencer, the ego. But consciousness comes and goes with its interactions. Bondage, for them, is caused by ignorance leading to this entanglement.
So liberation, apavarya, isn't about achieving some blissful state of consciousness, then?
No, crucially, it's defined as the absolute cessation of all pain and suffering. Not bliss, not happiness. Their reasoning is that pleasure and pain are always intertwined in worldly experience. Where there's pleasure, the potential for pain always exists. So true freedom for Nyāya is freedom from that entire duality, a state of pure, attributeless selfhood beyond suffering. It's quite different from, say, the Vedānta view.
Very different. And they offer some quite famous arguments for God's existence, don't they?
They do. Some of the most systematic in Indian philosophy. The main one is the causal argument, or argument from design, really. They look at the world, mountains, rivers, bodies, and see them as complex objects made of parts, like a pot or a chariot.
Effects that require a cause.
Exactly. And effects like these require an intelligent maker. Since individual souls like us are limited in knowledge and power, we couldn't have created the universe. Therefore, there must be an intelligent, omniscient, omnipotent creator, maintainer, and destroyer, and that's God, Ejara. God creates the world using the eternal atoms, space, time, ether, minds, and souls.
Creating from pre-existing materials, not out of nothing. What about that other argument, the one based on adu?
Right, the argument from moral governance. This tries to explain why people experience such different levels of happiness and suffering. Nyāya says this is due to adu, the unseen merit and demerit accumulated from our past actions, karma. But adu itself is just an unintelligent force. It doesn't know how or when to dispense its results.
So it needs a guiding hand.
Precisely. It requires an intelligent supervisor, God, to guide it, ensuring that each soul receives the appropriate consequences of their past actions, thus maintaining the moral order of the universe. They also accept scripture, viruti, as evidence for God, but their emphasis is really on these logical arguments.
Okay, that covers Nyāya's main contributions. Now let's bring in its partner system, Vaiśeṣika, founded by Kaneda. What's its unique focus, its categories and atomic theory?
Exactly. While allied with Nyāya, Vaiśeṣika's special contribution is its detailed ontological framework, its theory of padartha, the fundamental categories of reality or objects of knowledge. They lay out a comprehensive classification system.
How many categories are there?
They identify 6 positive categories: substance, dravya, quality, action, karma, generality or universal samanya, particularity of Jīya, and inherence, samavaya. And then there's the seventh, negative category, non-existence or absence, abhavya. It's an attempt to map everything that exists or can be known.
Let's quickly touch on those. Substance, this involves their famous atomic theory, right? Sounds quite modern.
It does, remarkably so. They posit that the four physical substances, earth, water, fire, and air, are ultimately composed of eternal, indivisible, partless atoms, paramon. These atoms are the eternal building blocks. All composite objects made from them are non-eternal, subject to creation and destruction. The smallest perceptible particle, interestingly, is said to be the triyoka, a triad composed of three dyads, which are themselves made of two atoms.
Okay. And qualities and actions, karma.
Qualities are the passive properties that reside in substances but don't cause change themselves. Things like color, taste, smell, number, magnitude, conjunction, disjunction, pleasure, pain, desire, aversion, effort. There are 24 recognized qualities. Action, or karma, refers specifically to physical movement upward, downward, contraction, expansion, locomotion. It's dynamic and causes conjunction and disjunction of substances.
And generality, samanya. That sounds like the universals Nyāya talked about.
Yes, very similar. Samanya refers to the shared class essences, or universals, that are eternal and inhere in multiple individuals, making them members of a class, like cowness, existing in all individual cows.
Now, particularity, Vishu, this one actually gives the Vaiśeṣika system its name, doesn't it?
It does. Particularity, or Vishya, is what explains the uniqueness of the eternal partless substances, atoms, ether, time, space, minds, and souls. Since these things have no parts, how do you distinguish one atom of earth from another identical atom of earth, or one soul from another? Vaiśeṣika says each possesses a unique, eternal Vishya that individuates it. These particulars are ultimate differentiators.
A unique identifier for each fundamental entity. And the last positive category, inherence, samavaya.
Samavaya is a unique kind of relation, an intimate, inseparable, permanent connection between two things that cannot exist independently. Examples include the relation between a whole and its parts, the cloth inheres in its threads, a quality and the substance possessing it, redness inheres in a rose, an action and the substance performing it, a universal and the individuals it resides in, and a particularity, Vishya, and the eternal substance it belongs to. It's contrasted with sayoga, or conjunction, which is a temporary separable relation, like a book resting on a table.
So how does this detailed classification and atomic theory fit into their bigger picture of cosmology and God?
Their atomic theory explains how non-eternal objects are formed, but the whole process is governed by the moral law, by adu, guided by God. Like Nyāya, they see creation and destruction as beginningless cycles. God doesn't create the atoms or souls, they're eternal, but his will sets the atoms in motion at the beginning of a creation cycle, allowing souls the opportunity to experience the results of their past karma by forming bodies and worlds.
So, wrapping up Vaiśeṣika, it's fundamentally a pluralistic realism, many distinct realities known through logic and experience.
Yes, exactly. A pluralistic realism with a strong emphasis on logical analysis and epistemology. Its enduring value really lies in its rigorous methodology for inquiry and its detailed analysis of the categories of reality, alongside its theistic arguments based on causality and moral order.
Okay, from that logical realism, let's shift gears quite dramatically to Sāṅkhya. This is a system known for its fundamental dualism spirit and matter, and, interestingly, for its strong atheistic arguments.
Yes, Sāṅkhya offers a fascinating contrast. It's a dualistic realism that traces everything back to two ultimate, independent, and eternal principles. Paru, which is pure, passive consciousness or spirit, and Pati, which is primal, active, unconscious matter or nature.
Two fundamental realities, and their theory of causation is quite distinctive too, isn't it, Cārvāka?
Very distinctive, and absolutely central to their whole system. Cārvāka is the doctrine that the effect, karya, pre-exists in a latent or unmanifest form within its material cause.
The effect is already in the cause. That sounds almost counterintuitive to how we usually think about something being created.
It does from a certain perspective, but Sāṅkhya argues strongly for it. Production, for them, isn't bringing something entirely new into existence. It's simply the manifestation or transformation of what was already potentially there. Think of oil already existing within sesame seeds, or curds existing latently within milk, or a pot existing within the clay before the potter shapes it. The potential is actualized, not created from nothing.
So it's about unveiling rather than inventing. How does this contrast with the Nyāya view?
They held the opposite view. Asadkaryavada or Arumpavada, which states the effect is a completely new beginning, something that did not exist before its production. Sāṅkhya argues their view avoids logical problems, like how something can come from nothing, and explains why specific materials are needed for specific effects. You can't get oil from sand.
Okay, so Prati, this primal matter, is the ultimate material cause of everything we experience in the world.
Correct. Prati is conceived as the single, ultimate, uncaused cause of the entire physical and psychical universe, everything except Purua, the pure consciousness. It's eternal, all-pervading, continuously changing and transforming, but fundamentally unconscious.
Unconscious, but the source of everything from rocks to our minds.
Yes, it's the source of the intellect, buddhi, the ego, ahakkara, the mind, manas, the senses, and the subtle and gross physical elements that make up the objects of the world. Its existence isn't directly perceived, but is inferred.
Inferred from what?
From several lines of reasoning. For example, all manifested objects are limited and dependent, suggesting an unlimited, independent source. Objects share common characteristics, like producing pleasure, pain, or indifference, pointing to a common origin with those qualities. The fact that effects imply a capable cause, and that effects eventually resolve back into their cause, also points towards a single unmanifest root cause, prakriti. This avoids an infinite regress of causes.
And Prati itself is composed of the three famous gutta, sattva, rajas, and tamas. But these aren't just qualities, are they? They're more like constituents.
Exactly, that's a crucial point. The guttas are not qualities of prakriti, they are prakti. They are the three substantial, dynamic elements or forces that constitute primal matter, constantly interacting like three strands woven into a single rope. They are inferred from their effects in the manifested world.
Can you quickly remind us what each good represents?
Sure. Sattva is associated with lightness, brightness, knowledge, pleasure, and harmony. Think of illumination, clarity, peace. Rajas is the principle of activity, motion, energy, passion, restlessness, and pain. Think of stimulation, drive, agitation. And tamas is associated with heaviness, inertia, darkness, obstruction, ignorance, indifference, and dullness. Think of passivity, resistance, confusion.
And everything in the universe, including our own minds and emotions, is a mixture of these three, constantly shifting in balance.
Precisely. They are in constant tension and interplay, combining and conflicting. Everything contains all three, but one usually predominates at any given moment, giving the object or mental state its specific character. When the guttas are in perfect equilibrium, prakriti is unmanifest. Evolution begins when this equilibrium is disturbed.
Okay, that's Priti, the unconscious active principle. What about the other side of the dualism, Puro?
Purua is pure consciousness. It's entirely distinct from the body, senses, mind, intellect, all of which are products of prakriti. Importantly, Purua is not a substance that has consciousness. It is consciousness itself inherently.
And its nature is?
It's described as immutable, unchanging, inactive, eternal, all-pervading, and inherently free, detached. It's beyond all change, activity, pleasure, pain, merit, demerit. It's the silent, passive witness, the subject that experiences but doesn't act. Sāṅkhya also argues, unlike Advaita Vedānta, that there are many distinct Purus, one for each living being.
Many distinct consciousnesses. But if Puro is pure, inactive, and detached, why do we experience suffering? Why do we feel bound?
That's the central problem Sāṅkhya addresses, the problem of apparent bondage and suffering. It arises from ignorance, avidya, or more specifically, aviveka, the lack of discrimination between Puru and Pratīti.
So confusion.
Yes. Due to this beginningless non-discrimination, the pure consciousness, Puo, mistakenly identifies itself with the products of Prati, particularly the intellect, buddhi, ego, ahakkara, and body. It's like Puro sees its reflection in the mirror of the mind-body complex and thinks, that's me experiencing pleasure, pain, change. This false identification is the root of suffering. Puru itself never actually suffers, it just appears to due to this confusion.
So how does the evolution of the world from Prakriti actually get started? If Puro is totally inactive, how does it disturb Prakriti's equilibrium?
This is a subtle point in Sāṅkhya. They say it's not active influence, but the mere presence, sanidhi of Puro, that disturbs the balance of the gus and Prakriti, like a magnet attracting iron filings without actively doing anything. It's proximity, a kind of passive catalyst.
Okay. A bit mysterious, but that's their explanation. And this kicks off the evolutionary chain.
Yes. Once the equilibrium is broken, the guttas start interacting dynamically. The first evolute from Prakriti is Mahat or Buddhi. the cosmic intellect.
Mm.
From Mahat evolves Ahakāra, the principle of ego or I-maker. Then, depending on which gucha predominates in Ahakāra, it gives rise to two sets of evolutes.
Which are?
From the sattvic aspect of Ahakāra emerged the mind, manas, the five sense organs, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and the five organs of action, speech, grasping, locomotion, excretion, reproduction. From the turtle-masic aspect emerged the five subtle elements, tanmatra, sound potential, touch potential, etc. And from these subtle elements, finally, evolved the five gross physical elements: ether, air, fire, water, earth.
That gives us, let's see, Praki Mahat Ahakāra, mind, 10 organs, 5 subtle elements, 5 gross elements, plus Puru, that's 25 principles, right? The famous 25 tattvas of Sāṅkhya.
Exactly, that's the whole map of reality according to Sāṅkhya. And individual beings consist of a Puru associated with a subtle body, made of intellect, ego, mind, senses, subtle elements, which transmigrates, and a gross physical body which perishes.
So, given this framework, liberation must involve undoing that fundamental confusion, that lack of discrimination.
Precisely. The path to liberation, Kaivalya, in Sāṅkhya, is through discriminative knowledge, vivekajnana. This isn't just intellectual book learning. It's a direct, intuitive, unwavering realization of the absolute difference between the self, Buddha, and everything that is not self, Puti, and all its evolutes: body, senses, mind, intellect, ego.
And when that happens,
the Buddha realizes its true nature as the pure, detached witness. The false identification ceases. Puti, having fulfilled its purpose for that Buddha, providing experience and ultimately enabling liberation, ceases to evolve further for it. The self rests in its own intrinsic nature as a dispassionate observer.
Does the liberated self gain any new qualities like bliss?
No. According to classical Sāṅkhya, liberation is the complete and permanent cessation of the threefold misery: internal, physical, external, and supernatural. But it's not described as a state of positive joy or bliss. Why? Because pleasure and pain are seen as attributes of pratuti, specifically arising from sattva and rajasgosha, not puru. Putu is beyond both. Liberation is a state of pure, serene, indifferent consciousness.
And can this happen while still alive?
Yes. Sāṅkhya accepts jivan mukti, liberation while living. The past karma might keep the body going for a while, like a potter's wheel spinning down, but the enlightened Puru is no longer bound or affected by its experiences. Videhamukti, liberation after death, is the final state when the body drops away.
Now let's get to that really distinctive feature, Sāṅkhya's stance on God. It's famously atheistic, isn't it? One of the few orthodox systems to argue against God's existence.
That's right. Classical Sāṅkhya presents several arguments against the need or possibility of Aishava God as the creator or controller of the universe.
What are their main arguments?
Well, first, they argue from God's nature. If God is supposed to be eternally perfect, unchanging, and liberated, like a Purua, then he must be immutable and inactive. An inactive being cannot be the active cause or creator of the dynamic world. Prote, being inherently active and ever-changing, is sufficient to explain the world's evolution.
So an unchanging God can't create a changing world. What else?
They question God's motivation. Why would a perfect being with no unfulfilled desires want to create a world? If it's out of compassion for creatures, why is the world filled with so much suffering and inequality? It doesn't seem like a compassionate act. If it's for his own sake, that implies imperfection, a need he wants to fulfill. Neither motivation seems consistent with a perfect God.
Fair points from their perspective. Any other arguments?
They also argue it's inconsistent with the existence of individual Puruas. If Puruas are parts or modifications of God, they should share his divine powers, which they clearly don't. If they are created by God, they wouldn't be eternal, which contradicts Sāṅkhya's view of Puru. Furthermore, they argue that the unconscious proti can evolve purposefully for Puru's sake without needing conscious guidance, just as non-intelligent milk flows from the cow for the nourishment of the calf. Teleology doesn't require a conscious designer.
So their conclusion is that pratiti, activated by the mere presence of Puru and operating according to the influence of karma associated with each Purua, is a sufficient explanation for the universe and its workings. No God required.
Exactly. It's a self-contained dualism.
It's a really coherent system in many ways, but it does seem to leave some nagging questions, doesn't it? Like, how exactly does that inactive Purua really influence active Prati just by presence? How does an unconscious intellect reflect consciousness? If all Puruas are just pure consciousness, what makes them distinct?
Those are precisely the kinds of challenging questions that critics and later philosophical schools raised and tried to address. Sāṅkhya provides a powerful framework, but these subtle points remained areas of debate.
Okay, building directly on Sāṅkhya's metaphysical foundation, we come to the yoga system, most famously associated with Patanjali and his Yoga Sutras. It shares Sāṅkhya's dualism, but makes one absolutely pivotal change.
That's right. The yoga school accepts, almost wholesale, Sāṅkhya's analysis of reality, the 25 principles, prakriti, mahat, akara, etc., and the plurality of purus. It provides the theoretical underpinning. But the crucial difference, the big addition, is that yoga admits the existence of God, or Ishvara.
So it takes Sāṅkhya's metaphysics and makes it theistic. What's the primary focus of the yoga school, then, if the metaphysics are largely borrowed?
The primary focus of yoga is intensely practical. It's about laying out the method, the discipline, the step-by-step path for achieving the same goal as Sāṅkhya. Vivekajnana, that direct discriminative knowledge of the Puru's absolute distinction from prakriti and all its modifications, body, mind, ego. Realizing the self as the transcendent, unchanging spirit.
And the method is yoga itself. How does Patanjali define yoga? I think you mentioned it earlier. It sounds quite radical.
He does. The famous second sutra defines yoga as Sitabhati Nirodha, the cessation or restraint of all the modifications or fluctuations of the mind stuff. Chitta.
Cessation of all mental activity. That sounds incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible.
It's certainly the ultimate aim, and yes, incredibly difficult. Yoga philosophy acknowledges different levels or states of the mind, sitabhyami. Some states, like being constantly distracted, tamta, or dull and stupefied, mutta, or even occasionally focused but mostly distracted, vikita, are not conducive to yoga.
So you need a certain level of mental stability to even begin.
Exactly. The states conducive to yoga are ekagra, one-pointed concentration where the mind is focused intently on a single object, and ultimately niruddha, the state of complete cessation where all mental modifications are arrested.
And these higher states of mind lead to samadhi, deep meditative absorption.
Yes. Yoga distinguishes between two main types of samadhi. First is saprajata samadhi, which is deep concentration with an object of focus. The mind is fully absorbed but still conscious of something, leading to clear insight into that object. It has various stages itself.
And the second type, the ultimate goal,
is asaprajata samadhi. This is absorption without an object. It's the state where even the one-pointed focus dissolves and all mental modifications cease entirely. There's no distinct cognition, just pure, contentless consciousness resting in its own nature. This is considered yoga par excellence, the direct precursor to final liberation, kaivalya.
But what prevents us from reaching these states? What are the obstacles the mind throws up?
These are the kleshas, the afflictions or hindrances that cause suffering and keep the mind agitated and obscured. Patanjali lists 5. 1. Avidya. Ignorance, the root affliction mistaking the impermanent for permanent, the impure for pure, suffering for happiness, and the not-self, prakriti for self, pura. 2. Asmita, egoism falsely identifying the pure self with the instruments of knowing, like the intellect, buddhi. 3. Raga, attachment or craving desire for pleasure and pleasant objects. 4. Daya, aversion or hatred, dislike of pain and unpleasant objects. 5. Abhidya, clinging to life or fear of death, the instinctive will to live, present even in the wise. 5. Abhinivesha. These kleshas are the impurities that the practice of yoga aims to attenuate and ultimately eradicate. So how does one practically do that? This brings us to the famous 8 limbs of yoga, the atya. Exactly. The yogaga are the 8 limbs or steps that systematically purify the mind and body, making concentration and insight possible. They form a progressive path.
What are the first few limbs? They seem foundational.
They are. The first 2 provide the essential ethical foundation. 1. Yama. These are 5 universal moral commandments or restraints. Ahimsa, nonviolence. Satya, truthfulness, astaya, non-stealing. Brahmacharya, continence, control of senses. And abrigaraha, non-possessiveness, non-greed. 2. Nyāya. These are 5 personal observances or positive disciplines. Shoka, purity internal and external. Sattva, contentment. Tapas, austerity or self-discipline. Slatiya, self-study, study of scriptures. And Ishvara prachivna, devotion or surrender to God.
So devotion to God comes in right there in the second limb. We'll come back to that. What are the next limbs? These are perhaps more what people think of as yoga practice.
Yes, the next 3 focus more on controlling the body and senses. 3. Posture, steady and comfortable physical postures that aid concentration and prevent the body from being a distraction. 4. Pranayama, breath control, regulation of the breath. Pracha, vital energy, to calm the nervous system and steady the mind. 5. Pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, drawing the senses inward, away from external objects so the mind is not pulled outwards by sensory input.
Okay, so ethical foundation, body control, sense withdrawal. What are the final 3 limbs? These seem to be purely mental.
They are. These are the internal limbs, antarga sadhana, that constitute concentration itself. 6. Dharana, concentration, fixing the mind's attention on a single point or object, internal or external. 7. Dharana, meditation, an unbroken, continuous flow of attention toward that object of concentration. 8. Samadhi, absorption, the state where the mind becomes completely absorbed in the object of meditation, losing awareness of itself as separate. 8. Samadhi. Patanjali notes that when these last 3, dharan, dhyana, and samadhi, are practiced together seamlessly on the same object, it constitutes sayama, a powerful tool for gaining deeper knowledge and insight.
It's a very systematic progression, from external conduct right through to the deepest states of mind. Now, let's go back to God, Ishvara. How does God function in the yoga system, given its Sāṅkhya roots? Is God the creator?
No, interestingly, yoga doesn't posit God as the creator of the universe, largely accepting Sāṅkhya's cosmology. Instead, Ishvara in yoga is defined as a special puru, a unique eternal consciousness that was never and will never be touched by the kleshas, karma, or their results. God is eternally free, omniscient, the teacher of the ancient sages.
So not a creator, but a perfect, eternally liberated being. What's the practical role then? Why is devotion, Ishvara Pranchanan, included as a niyama?
It's considered one of the most effective means to attain samadhi. Devotion to God helps to quiet the mind, overcome obstacles, and focus attention. Patanjali suggests that through surrender to God, the aspirant can receive divine grace, which helps in purging impurities and making faster progress on the path. God acts as an inspiration, an ideal, and a helper through grace for the devotee aiming for liberation. It adds a devotional element that's absent in classical Sāṅkhya.
So yoga provides the practical how-to for the liberation described by Sāṅkhya, but adds the element of divine assistance through devotion.
That's a good summary. It takes the dualistic metaphysics and provides a structured, practical, and ultimately theistic path towards realizing the distinction between pudu and prakti.
All right, moving from the paths focused on individual discipline and knowledge, let's turn to Mīmāṁsā. This school seems quite different, with its primary focus on upholding the authority of the Vedas, especially their ritualistic portions, often described as ritualistic pragmatism.
Yes, the Mīmāṁsā school, founded by Jaina, has a very specific initial objective: to establish the unquestionable authority of the Vedas and provide rules for interpreting their injunctions, particularly those related to performing complex sacrificial rituals. Yadyans. Their philosophy largely developed to support this primary aim, defending the worldview implied by Vedic ritualism. The core concern is dharma, understood primarily as duty enjoined by the Vedas.
And their view on the authority of the Vedas is really unique, isn't it? It's not based on divine authorship like in many other orthodox schools.
It's quite radical, actually. Mīmāṁsā argues that the Vedas are apauruya, meaning they are not the work of any person, human or divine. They are considered eternal, self-existent, and inherently valid.
Eternal and authorless. How do they argue for that?
Their reasoning includes points like, there's no memory or record of any author, different traditions attribute authorship to different figures, suggesting no one really knows, and fundamentally, the validity of knowledge doesn't depend on its source, but on the absence of contradicting factors. If a Vedic statement provides knowledge, and there's no defect in the process and no subsequent knowledge contradicts it, then its authority is self-evident, just like perception under normal conditions. It doesn't need an author to validate it.
So their validity is intrinsic, not derived. Okay, what about their theory of knowledge, their prameyas? They accept the usual ones, but add a couple of distinctive ones too, right?
They do. They generally accept perception, inference, comparison, upamana, and testimony, shabda, or Vedic authority, which is paramount for them. Their understanding of comparison is slightly different from Nyāya's. For Mīmāṁsā, it's the knowledge of an absent object's similarity to a present one. E.g., remembering, my cow at home is similar to this gavaya I see now. They uniquely consider similarity, sadhya itself, an independent category of reality.
And then they add postulation, or arthapati. This one sounds really interesting and practical.
It is. This is another great aha moment. Arthapati is the derivation of knowledge through necessary presumption or supposition. It's when you're faced with two apparently conflicting yet known facts, and you postulate an unperceived third fact that is the only way to reconcile the first two.
Can you give that classic example again?
Sure. The famous one is, Devadatta is alive, but he is not in his house. These two facts seem contradictory if you assume people are always in their houses. The only way to reconcile his being alive with his absence from the house is to postulate that he must be somewhere outside. You don't perceive him outside. You don't infer it through invariable concomitants, but you have to assume it to make sense of the known facts.
So it's a logical necessity driven by an apparent contradiction in what you already know.
Exactly. It's not just a guess or hypothesis. It's considered a valid means of knowledge because it's the only explanation. Another example often given: the fat Devadatta does not eat during the day. This implies the necessary postulation. He must eat at night. Mīmāmsikas argue this isn't inference. They also use it extensively in interpreting texts, like supplying missing words or understanding figurative meanings.
And some Mīmāmsikas accept a sixth source, too, non-cognition.
Yes, the Bai school of Mīmāṁsā, followers of Kumarila Bhaya, accepts non-cognition, anupalabdhi, as a distinct prama for knowing absences. How do you know there is no jar on the ground? Not by perceiving an absence, they argue, but by the absence of perception of the jar under conditions where it would have been perceived if it were present. It's knowledge derived directly from non-perception.
Okay, so with all this intricate focus on Vedic authority, ritual interpretation, and unique ways of knowing, what did Mīmāṁsā consider the highest good, the ultimate goal?
Initially, in the earlier phase of Mīmāṁsā, the primary goal was straightforward: the attainment of heaven, Sāṅkhya, conceived as a state of unalloyed bliss, achieved through the correct performance of Vedic sacrifices. The rituals themselves, when performed properly, generated that unseen potency, apurva, which guaranteed future heavenly reward.
But did that view change later? Did they align more with the other schools focused on liberation?
Yes. Later Mīmāṁsā thinkers, likely influenced by the prevailing philosophical climate, did incorporate the goal of liberation over from the cycle of birth and death. They argued that liberation could be achieved by exhausting past karma through experiencing its results, and preventing future karma by performing obligatory duties, nitya and naimittika karmas, without any desire for reward, coupled with gaining self-knowledge derived from the Upanadic portions of the Veda.
So duty for duty's sake, essentially, to avoid new karma. And one last point on Mīmāṁsā, their view on God, similar to Sāṅkhya.
Yes, classical Mīmāṁsā, like classical Sāṅkhya, does not accept the existence of a creator God. Since the Vedas are eternal and authorless, and the world itself is seen as an eternal process governed by the law of karma and the inherent efficacy of Vedic rituals, there's simply no need to postulate a God as creator, sustainer, or destroyer. The system functions based on the impersonal authority of the Veda and the autonomous law of karma.
Fascinating. A world running on eternal rules and rituals without divine intervention. Okay, from the ritual focus of Mīmāṁsā, we finally arrive at Vedānta. This is often seen as the culmination, the pinnacle of Indian philosophical thought, especially its monistic strains. It's primarily based on the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita, right?
That's correct. Vedanta literally means the end or culmination of the Vedas, referring mainly to the Upanishads found at the end of the Vedic corpus. All Vedanta schools are fundamentally monistic, meaning they believe in one single, ultimate, independent reality, which they call Brahman. However, differ significantly in how they understand the nature of Brahman and its relationship to the world and individual souls.
And how do they claim we come to know this ultimate reality, Brahman? Is it through reason alone?
For most Vedanta schools, particularly the more theistic ones, and even initially for Advaita, the primary source of knowledge about Brahman is scriptural testimony, Shabda, specifically the Upanishads. Reason, Tarka, plays a crucial role in understanding, interpreting, and defending scriptural truths, removing doubts, but the initial revelation comes from the Veda. An element of faith or trust, Jyota, in the scripture is often seen as a necessary starting point.
Okay, so scripture provides the map. Now, the most influential school of Vedanta is undoubtedly Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, pure, radical non-dualism. How does Shankara conceive of the world we experience every day? Is it real in the same way Brahman is real?
Absolutely not. This is Shankara's most famous and radical doctrine. The world, according to Advaita, is ultimately Maya or avidya. It's an appearance, vivarta or asyasa, a superimposition onto the one reality, Brahman, much like the illusion of a snake is superimposed onto a rope in dim light, or like the objects in a dream seem real while dreaming but vanish upon waking.
So the world isn't ultimately real. Why did he arrive at such a conclusion?
His reasoning is rooted in interpreting the Upanishads. Some passages describe Brahman as the sole reality, without qualities, nirgunta, unchanging, one without a second. Other passages describe Brahman as the cause of the world, implying qualities, sagut. To reconcile these, Sankara argues that the qualityless Brahman is the ultimate truth, paramarthika, and the descriptions of creation and a qualified Brahman belong to the level of empirical reality, yavarika, which is ultimately illusory. The fact that the world appearance vanishes upon attaining true knowledge of Brahman also proves its lack of ultimate reality.
So this Maya, this power of illusion or ignorance, what is it exactly? Is it real? Is it unreal?
That's the tricky part. Shankara describes Maya Vidya as something positive, bhavarupa majinam, not just absence of knowledge, beginningless, anadi, but ultimately indescribable, anirvakanya. It cannot be categorized as either absolutely real, sat, or absolutely unreal, asat.
Why indescribable?
Because it appears to exist, so it's not absolutely unreal like a square circle, but it is eventually sublated or canceled out by true knowledge, so it's not absolutely real like Brahman. It occupies a strange intermediate status, the status of appearance. It's the power that conceals Brahman's true nature and projects the illusion of the manifold world.
And this leads to Sankara's famous distinction between two levels of truth or reality.
Exactly. There's a transcendental standpoint, paramarthya, the absolute truth accessible only to the fully enlightened. From this view, only nirgucha Brahman, qualityless, distinctionless consciousness is real. The world and individual souls are unreal appearances.
And the other standpoint
is the empirical standpoint, vyavahārika, the relative reality of our everyday experience, the standpoint of unenlightened beings still under the spell of Maya. From this perspective, the world appears real. Brahman appears as Aishvara, God, the qualified Sagu, personal creator, sustainer, and destroyer, and the individual self, Jiva, appears as a limited, finite ego. All our practical life, science, ethics, religion, it operates at this empirical level and is perfectly valid within that level. So from the ultimate perspective, only Brahman exists. What is the nature of this Brahman, this absolute reality? Brahman is absolute reality, absolute consciousness, and absolute bliss, Satchitananda. Pure existence and pure consciousness are considered self-evident. Their contradiction is unthinkable. You can doubt anything else, but you can't coherently doubt your own existence or consciousness while doubting. This self-luminous, unchanging consciousness existence is the ultimate substrate of all appearances. The Blissnanda aspect refers to its nature as absolute fullness, free from all limitation and suffering.
And Sankara has a specific view on logical contradiction versus experiential contradiction related to appearance.
Yes. He distinguishes between the contradiction of an illusion through experience, like the rope contradicting the snake illusion, and the way thought or reason reveals the inherent logical inconsistency of the world of multiplicity and change itself. Any limited changing object, when deeply analyzed, is found to be ultimately inconsistent with the nature of pure unchanging existence. Brahman. Particulars like pots or cloths appear, but their separateness and changeability are ultimately illusory when seen against the backdrop of the one indivisible reality.
This all ties into his theory of error, how illusions happen.
Exactly. His theory is called Nirvakanyakativada, the theory of the apprehension of the indescribable. He argues against other theories. Against Mīmāṁsā, which says all knowledge is true, error is just non-apprehension. He says the illusion "this is a snake" is a single positive cognition, not just a failure to see the rope properly, otherwise, why the fear reaction? Against Buddhist subjective idealism, he argues memory can't explain the thisness, the perceived present reality of the illusory object.
So what is happening in an illusion, according to Sankara?
Ignorance avidya does two things. It conceals avaran, the true nature of the substrate, the rope, and it projects vikapa, the illusory appearance, the snake, onto it. This projected appearance, the snake, is an indescribable creation, anirvakanya, neither real nor unreal, generated by Maya.
So how does the individual self, the jiva, fit into this non-dual picture? If only Brahman is real, what am I?
Ultimately, the jiva is nothing other than Brahman itself. Bondage arises because, due to beginningless ignorance, avidya, the infinite Brahman appears limited, identifying itself with a particular mind-body complex, both the gross physical body and the subtle body, mind, intellect, senses, vital forces. It forgets its true unlimited nature and becomes a finite ego, a hakara, subject to suffering, birth, and death.
So the individuality is part of the illusion.
Yes. Consciousness itself is one, self-luminous, like the sun. It doesn't need the senses or mind to create it. They only serve to reveal objects by removing the obstructions of ignorance, like opening a window to let sunlight in. The jiva is often described using analogies like the reflection pratibimba of the one sun in many different pots of water, or like the one space seemingly limited by the walls of a pot, gatkasha. The limitations are apparent, not real. Differences between jivas are explained by differences in their limiting adjuncts, the mind-body complex shaped by karma and ignorance.
Therefore, liberation mukti must be the realization of this inherent identity. I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi.
Exactly. Liberation isn't acquiring something new, it's simply the removal of the ignorance that obscures the already existing reality of non-duality. It's realizing your true nature.
How is this achieved practically?
Advaita outlines a path involving rigorous preparation and practice. First, the fourfold qualification, satanakapya. 1. Discrimination between the eternal Brahman and the non-eternal world. 2. Detachment from desires for enjoyment, here or hereafter. 3. Cultivation of the 6 virtues, calmness, sense control, withdrawal, forbearance, concentration, faith. 4. An intense longing for liberation, mumukutva.
And once prepared,
Then comes a threefold process of study under a qualified guru. 1. Shravana, listening to the Vedānta teachings, especially the great sayings like that thou art. 2. Manana, reflection and reasoning upon the teachings to remove intellectual doubts. 3. Nididhyasana, deep repeated meditation on the truth I am Brahman to overcome habitual wrong identification with the mind-body.
leading ultimately to
To direct immediate unshakable realization of parakānuputi, of one's identity with Brahman. This destroys ignorance root and stem.
Can this happen while still living in the body? Jivan Mukti.
Yes, Advaita strongly affirms the possibility of Jivan Mukti, liberation while alive. Though the body may continue for a while due to the momentum of past karma, prapta karma, the enlightened person, Jnan Mukta, is no longer identified with it or affected by its pains and pleasures. They live in the world but are not of the world, untouched by its sorrows, like a lotus leaf by water. Perfection can be attained in this life.
What about ethics in Advaita? If the world is ultimately unreal, do right and wrong still matter?
From the ultimate paramarthika standpoint, distinctions dissolve. But from the empirical vyavarika standpoint, ethics are absolutely crucial. Right conduct, purification of the mind, and fulfilling one's duties are essential preparations for gaining the competence to realize Brahman. Actions that lead towards self-knowledge and universal welfare are good. Furthermore, the very doctrine of the oneness of all existence provides a powerful metaphysical foundation for ethics, promoting love, compassion, unity, and self-sacrifice, seeing the same self in all beings.
It's easy to see why William James called it the paragon of all monistic systems. It offers that sense of ultimate security and unity.
It does. It's a profoundly influential and logically rigorous system.
But Advaita isn't the only Vedanta school. Let's briefly touch on Ramanuja's Viṣidvaita Vedanta, or qualified non-dualism. How does he differ from Shukara?
Ramanuja offers a strong critique of Chokara's concept of Maya as illusion and Nirgutta Brahman as the sole reality. For Ramanuja, Maya is not illusion but God's real, wonderful, creative power. Brahman is not qualityless, but eternally possesses infinite auspicious qualities. The world and individual souls are also eternally real. They are not illusions but constitute the body or attributes of Brahman.
So Brahman is real, and the world and souls are also real, but dependent on Brahman.
Exactly. It's non-dualism, Advaita, but it's qualified, Viṣyata, by the reality of diversity within the unity. Brahman is the one reality, but it eternally includes within itself the distinct realities of conscious souls and unconscious matter, asik. These are inseparable modes or attributes of Brahman, forming a unified whole, like a soul and its body. God is the Saguna Brahman, a personal God, the supreme person Puruttama, possessing infinite knowledge, power, love, etc. He is both immanent as the inner controller of souls and matter and transcendent.
A much more theistic picture. How does Ramanuja understand the relationship between Brahman, souls, and matter? He uses the term Vedāvida.
While some other schools use Vedāvida, identity and difference, more centrally, Ramanuja's view is more accurately described as unity of the qualified whole. He stresses the inseparable relationship upataksidi between substance, Brahman, and its attributes, mode, souls, and matter. They are different yet eternally and necessarily united in the one reality of Brahman. The whole Brahman is qualified by its real parts or attributes.
And the path to liberation for Ramanuja. Given his emphasis on a personal God, it must be different from Sankara's path of pure knowledge.
Very different. While knowledge is essential, Ramanuja emphasizes that mere intellectual knowledge, jhana, isn't sufficient for liberation. Liberation comes through bhakti, intense, loving devotion to God. specifically Vijnāraya.
Devotion is the key.
Yes. True knowledge, for Ramanuja, matures into dhruva smite, steady, constant remembrance of God, which flows like an unbroken stream of oil. This continuous meditation filled with love eventually leads to a direct, intuitive vision, darshana, of God. This bhakti must be accompanied by karma yoga, performing duties without attachment, and jnana yoga, understanding one's true nature as dependent on God.
And he also emphasizes grace, doesn't he? The idea of prapatti.
Absolutely. Prapatti, or complete self-surrender to God, is considered a direct and alternative path, especially for those unable to practice the demanding path of bhakti yoga. It involves absolute faith in God's mercy and protection, taking refuge in Him alone. Through His grace, God overlooks the devotee's faults and grants liberation. It highlights the centrality of divine grace and the personal relationship with God in Ramanuja's system. Liberation, for him, is not merging into a qualityless absolute, but attaining an eternal state of blissful service and communion with the personal God in His supreme abode.
What an incredible journey we've taken. We've really spanned the spectrum of Indian philosophical thought, haven't we? From the Cārvākas, who insisted only perception counts, right across to the subtle non-dualism of Sankara's Vedānta and the qualified non-dualism of Ramanuja.
It's truly breathtaking when you consider the sheer range and depth. We've seen those common threads, that universal quest for liberation from suffering, the pervasive influence of the law of karma, the necessity of inner discipline, meditation, self-control.
Right. But we've also seen these fascinating divergences. Totally different approaches to knowledge, radically different views on the nature of reality, the self, and even profound disagreements about the existence or nature of God. It's a testament to the intellectual dynamism of this tradition.
Absolutely. A landscape full of competing, yet deeply reasoned worldviews.
And for you, our listener, who joined us for this deep dive, maybe hoping for some quick insights, some of those aha moments, we really hope you found some in these ancient explorations. Because understanding these different perspectives isn't just, a history lesson.
Not at all. It's incredibly relevant. Thinking about how these schools approach knowledge, reality, suffering, it gives you powerful tools, different lenses, for looking at our own complex world. Appreciating these diverse viewpoints can help us navigate today's information overload, today's polarized debates, with more nuance, more critical thinking.
And maybe more intellectual humility.
Definitely more humility. Realizing how many different coherent ways there are to try and make sense of existence.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over. In our world, which is just saturated with information and often feels split into opposing camps, think about the methods we explored today. That structured debate in Indian philosophy, remember the Purvapaka, fairly stating the opponent's view, the Kantana, logical refutation, the Siddhanta, proving your own case, and that deep respect for different perspectives, like the Jaina Anekantavada. Doesn't this offer a kind of timeless blueprint, not just for doing philosophy, but for how we engage with ideas generally? For fostering genuine understanding, even with views we disagree with, what could we learn from these ancient methods as we try to be well-informed, critically engaged people in our own time?